This is a version of a presentation I gave at the Fuse conference here in Chicago a few weeks ago, and I've done my best to try to put this into a form that retains a lot of the information and dynamic content, but in a static way. So I'm going to get started, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time left over for questions at the end. I want to start with a joke. It's a perception joke. I love perception jokes. And it's about a woman who gets on a bus, and as she's getting on the bus with her baby in her arms, the bus driver does a double take and says, "Oh my God, that's the ugliest baby I have ever seen in my entire life." And the woman is very upset. She's insulted, and she storms to the back of the bus and sits down next to a fellow and says, "You won't believe the nerve of the bus driver. He just totally insulted me." And the guy next to her says, "Well, you go right up there to the front of the bus. I'll hold your monkey for you." That's just to say that all things are subject to interpretation. Whatever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth. One woman's baby is another man's monkey. So I'm Rob Swan. I'm the SVP, Executive Creative Director here at Brandimage in Chicago. But for the sake of this presentation, you can call me Professor. A lot of clients and staff do too, so I won't be insulted. I want to thank Shock for giving me the opportunity to have this conversation with you today, and I also want to thank a lot of the people who contributed to making the great work that I'll be showing you at the end of this presentation. So let's start with a little fun with perception. I already did with my joke, but there's a few other things I want to share that are pretty timely and I think relevant to our conversation. The first is this image that kind of popped up in the news not long ago of Angela Merkel, and she got caught kind of with this unfortunate shadow across her lips, which actually was being cast by the finger of Benjamin Netanyahu. So if you're familiar with current events, you'll know that the Israeli Prime Minister and the German President being caught in a pose like this is fairly unfortunate, but also meaningful because of the context behind their history. This is a poster that's come out recently for a movie by Lars von Trier called NYMPHOMANIAC, and I'm going to come back to this a little bit later. But to me, this is an intelligently outrageous challenge to viewers, and a lot of that's because of the meaning that's being implied through both the typography and the imagery here. This is one of my all-time favorites. This is Dimitri Martin, who did a sketch that said, you know, beards are cool. And I think I saw Phil Duncan from P&G talk not long ago about Gillette and their struggles with men and beards and never knowing whether they're in or not. Well, right now they're in, so beards are definitely cool. But if they get a little bit longer than what I'm showing here, then you're definitely perceived as being wise if you have a beard like that. If it gets a little bit longer than that, like into ZZ Top territory, then I think you can start being called crazy. If it gets longer than that even, then you're crazy wise. And finally, if it gets really, really long, you're just a wizard. And that's, you know, something that we'll all kind of like notice and understand immediately just based on the length of men's beards. So what's going on here? Why are those things working, and why can I make a joke like that and have us all, hopefully have us all understand it? That's meaning at work. When we talk about meaning in design, it's all about when something is being conveyed that has implied and explicit significance, something that makes it valuable and meaningful to you, that gives it purpose, that's not directly expressed and overtly stated. That's what meaningful communication is all about, and that's really what the thrust of my conversation with everybody is about today. So with this kind of stuff, I always ask myself why. In fact, I ask myself why about everything, but particularly with design. Why does this work? And then, of course, why is this important to not only me as the viewer, but to culture at large? And then, of course, because I'm a marketer and a designer, I say, well, why is this important for brands? Why do I need to understand this and put it to use for brands? And of course, how can this make my design and the world of design more effective? And of course, how can I mean my clients, make money off of it? After all, we are in the business of making money for our clients and for ourselves doing this stuff. And I want to finally end by talking about what does it look like when branding and package design specifically start to put some of the principles that I'm going to talk to you about to use. So why does this work? The first question. Well, the Blue Man Group says information comes in through your eyes and some Hallowak shiznit happens in your brizzle, which is kind of a nice unscientific way of saying Rod Z. Coney stuff happens when visual and sensory information comes in and you process it in your brain. I just call it perception, and I think a lot of us do too. It's the way that we assign meaning to everything that we see, hear, feel, and taste. All the stimulus that we come into contact with all day long, every day, wherever we go, is processed in our brain and assigned meaning. You know, this means that. I can trust this because, you know, I know what it is and I feel good about it. I don't trust this because I don't feel good about it. That's all happening very, very quickly. In fact, it happens instantaneously. We perceive meaning it starts happening at the fraction of a second that we come into contact with any stimulus. 90% of what we perceive and what we see and feel and hear and experience is happening at the subconscious level. So if you think about it as an iceberg, there's the part of the iceberg that's above the water, and then there's the part of the iceberg that's below the water. And that subconscious perception is really shaped by emotion. Intuitively and instinctively, we all feel emotion no matter where we are, no matter what culture we live in the world. And our experiences in that culture and in that part of the world and in the interaction with each other that we feel. Those are the forces that actually shape the way we perceive meaning. And it's also, I believe, 100% about how our decisions are made. You know, all of our decisions are made in that intuitive fraction of a second. And it's particularly true when you're in a shopping experience and you're trying to sell people on a branded proposition. So let's look at this iceberg in a little bit more detail, because the iceberg really is the heart of my point here. It starts on the bottom and it works its way up. So at the very bottom of the iceberg, in terms of the nature of perception of meaning, is what you're going to feel. So this is instinctive perception. This is visceral, intuitively felt assessment of what you're experiencing and what you're being exposed to. This is emotion. This is something we all feel no matter where we are, no matter who we are. It's hardwired into the circuitry of our brains, and it's been that way since we became sentient beings. The next layer up is about how you're going to feel that proposition. So this is still subconscious, it's still below the waterline, but this layer is all about taking that instinctive perception and putting it through the filter of your cultural and experiential values. You know, because I live in the culture that I'm in, I'm able to actually take that intuitive feeling and process it differently to understand what it means for me in my particular culture and situation. Then the next layer up, above the waterline, is why you should believe it. So this is the proof point. If I feel something intuitively, and then I am believing it, and I'm steered towards a more unique understanding of that culturally, above the waterline is the proof, right? This is the rational, data-driven assessment of what I'm seeing being true. So a good way to kind of think about this, for me, is about thinking about perception as being driven by messaging. So when I talk about driving the perception of meaning, particularly through design, it is literally like driving. So the first thing you feel is that rush of acceleration, that feeling of exhilaration, of moving fast, of being in motion. That's the intuitive, instinctive perception that you should feel first. The next layer up is all about the steering. So how do we take this exhilaration and this acceleration and guide it and steer it towards where we want to go with it? It's very much like the steering wheel on the car. And then above the waterline is the speedometer. This is the thing that literally rationally tells you that yes, the things that I'm feeling, and yes, the direction I think I'm going in is actually the speed and the direction that I'm going in. So coming back to my NYMPHOMANIAC poster, and if you want to kind of take that message apart and look at how design's doing this, the photograph is the instinctive and intuitive part of that message. So, you know, I won't go into a lot of detail, but I think, again, instinctively and intuitively, you probably have a pretty good idea of what's going on with this woman. Then that message is run through a filter and owned more specifically by the branded proposition, in this case this movie, by a typographical arrangement with an icon in the middle that's also very suggestive. And again, I won't go into a lot of detail about that. And then finally, the proof point in the message is this statement, "Forget about love," which, if you haven't figured it out by this point, you know, it's just there to remind you, this is not about love. You know, this is about the other part of love, the more physical part of love. So how do we turn this into kind of a shopper context and put this to use in the stuff that we do every day? I like to think about shopper engagements and asking people to spend their money in a transaction, kind of like a script in a movie. You know, it's a very, very short script in a movie, but it's still an engagement and a play that we can kind of script out. So the scene here is anywhere a consumer is being asked to make a transaction. And in the lower corner here, we see this woman who's, you know, coming up to a category, and she's saying, "I have a need," and it's either conscious or unconscious, physical or emotional. And I'm going to look at this a couple of ways. I'm going to look at it at the top in relationship to my iceberg that I just went through, and then I'm also going to look at it from what she might be thinking down at the bottom. So when you come up to a category, and we all know how crowded categories are in shopping environment, retail shopping environments, and in fact it's true online these days as well, the first thing you're doing is trying to establish relevancy. This is the visceral communication of the nature of the offer. It's the product experience. This is an area where physical and structural packaging is really, really important, because that's the first criteria we use to understand what the product actually does. Is it in a bottle? It's liquid. Is it in a jar? It's viscous. If it's, you know, in a solid, it's wrapped. Those things all, or in a can. So she's thinking, what looks like, this looks like the kind of thing that, what looks like the kind of thing that I need and want. The next thing is establishing authenticity and believability. So this is the middle of the iceberg. This is that uniquely disruptive, brand-owned perspective and benefit. She says, this is different and special like me, what I want to be and how I want to feel. And then you're establishing trust at that point with the proof point. It's the evidence that what she's thinking is actually being fulfilled. As I thought, this is what I expected and has what I need. And she gets it in her hand, and then she's done. I'm in. You've got her at that point. So meaning is a really critical component of owned equity for brands, and I'm going to do another presentation on this, so stay tuned, because I think this is a really rich opportunity. If you think about owned equity as a 2x2 of owned and felt, you can have owned but not felt equity, which is feature benefit based. This is, you know, a feature we own, and you keep hitting it on people again and again and again. It can be felt but not owned, which is ethical and values based. You could have a product that's based on ethics and a philosophy, but not necessarily have a lot of differentiating features as a product. It could be not owned and not felt, which is price-based. This is just commodities. I know from commodities, I worked trying to sell toilet paper for Kimberly-Clark for a long time. But where you really want to be is felt and owned. And that's where story comes into play. Story-based equity is what makes brands more meaningful and gives them a lot of staying power and makes them iconic. So story is the promise of an experience. It's really an invitation to connect the dots. People talk a lot about storytelling in design, and for me it's about the gaps as much as it is filling the gaps and showing people what it is. The allure of stories is that you don't know what's going to happen next, but you want to know what's going to happen next. So this connect the dots thing is from a place called Extreme Connect the Dots, and I think there might be an extreme image. I haven't connected the dots yet, but I think if you connect them, it might be extreme. I don't know, but that's a nymphomaniac question. So Exhibit 4, we're born dot connectors. As people, we come into the world trying to touch things, feel things, learn about things, understand what they are and why they are. And that's why babies are always grabbing things and putting them into their mouths and stuff like that. The Flight 370 thing right now, tragic, but this insatiable need for us to know where it is, what's going on, why is it happening. This is a story that's compelling and a drama that's very human and taps into this. The Bachelor. My wife watched this show, and the whole season they wonder who's going to get chosen and why. Detective shows, crossword puzzles, acculturated games like charades, all about filling the blanks. Sherlock, I'm a big fan. Chess and strategy, it's all about trying to guess what your opponent's going to do and fill in the blanks. And of course, the longest running game show. Every game show is a version of fill in the blanks and figure out what's going to happen next. So what's in a meaningful story for design? Well, for me, it's whatever your mind fills in the blanks with. So let's look at meaningful storytelling in design. And a friend and a client partner of mine, Terry Schwartz at Campbell's, pointed out to me that movie posters are a really good example of how design does what I'm talking about. A movie poster, if you think about it, is a story in a static image. You're trying to tell just enough about what's going to happen so that you're intrigued and you want to go see more, but you're also giving them enough to make them want to experience something emotionally at that moment. Jaws is a great example, and I won't tell you what the other movies I'm going to show you are here because you're probably going to look at them and be able to fill in the blanks yourself. But movie posters really are an interesting way to think about how this is being done. So understanding and defining meaning is the key to defining these stories that I'm talking about. If we can understand the triggers that are going to be meaningful to people, then we can create those stories that people are going to feel, not just see, but they're going to feel at that visceral level. So we ask ourselves all the time, what's more likely to influence a time-pressed purchase decision and make people spend their hard-earned money? Is it data or is it empathy? Butter was a category that we were looking at and said, wow, there's a big opportunity here because there's lots of brands and there's lots of messages being broadcast out there, but some of them seem to be similar to each other, and in fact a lot of them seem to be not necessarily taking compelling advantage of the storytelling that I'm talking about. So of course you've got cows and farms, in case you didn't know that butter comes from cows and farms. You've got maidens and mountains, which is all about virgin territory. Enough said about that. I could come back and talk about that in a whole presentation. You've got European heritage and butter making history. They must have it cracked because they've been doing it for a really long time. And then you've got weird butter substitutes that are promising to be better than butter because they're trying to deposition butter as being bad. And then you've got these niche things that are saying, you guys are ridiculous, why doesn't anyone take me seriously? Butter is an Epicurean ingredient and should be kind of treated like such. The good news is for us, when we came at this category was, we're in a golden age for butter consumption, according to Time magazine, and I believe it. Dodie Smith said, I shouldn't think even millionaires could eat anything nicer than new bread and real butter with honey for tea. And so we thought, well, butter needs to be elevated. It's time for butter to start being treated with more respect. And we went out and we looked at the European landscape and some of the more foodie, culture-based propositions in the United States. You see things like continental country table crockery, Sunday best American country table, country table linen, very American feeling things. Then you've got this artisanal made and wrapped with simple materials, elevated elegance and service reference, something that actually looks like it's going to be served to you at a table, but you can use in your own kitchen. And then finally things like closer to the source, pre-processed stuff, literally packed into a wooden basket on the farm and delivered to you in your home. So it occurred to us to put Karl Lagerfeld in a pair of overalls, which Karl Lagerfeld probably won't like, so nobody tell him that we did this, because we also, I think, gave him a lot of extra weight, which he really wouldn't like. He probably wouldn't mind overalls as much as he would the extra weight. But the idea was, how can you take style and fashion and the world of haute couture and premium and bring it into collision, if you will, with the world of farming and the roots of dairy. And, this has been done in other categories. We've seen this done in propositions like ice cream, and vodka is a great example of how they took grain neutral spirits and made it a premium proposition just through packaging. So when we do this, it starts with the idea or the story. So our story was the intersection of luxury, indulgence, and honesty. Then we decode meaning. We go out and we look for all the different things that we can find that represent that, so that we can understand which ones to use. So we're identifying the meaning of instinctively and culturally accepted ubiquitous sensory codes, and then they're recoding them. So we're combining those codes to create unique meaning that reflects the brand's essence and reinforces its purpose. This is a design that we did, from the ground up, from naming all the way through to structural design, through the label to bring our Karl Lagerfeld and overalls proposition to life. So you've got the dairy heritage represented in the cannery top. You've got the elegance and luxury represented in the staging of the product and the graphic representation. And then finally you've got that proof point with a medallion that's put on by the woman who actually churned the butter, because our whole proposition and proof point here was this butter is hand churned and packed by real people. So I like to think about the way these codes can come together as kind of physics. And I have 3 examples to share with you rather quickly here. The first is about code bonding. So if you think about the way salt crystals are formed, it's similar molecules that are coming together in mass to create one large thing. And that's exactly the way you can think about design. So again, picking a category, we looked at bourbon. At the top row here, you've got a lot of things to talk about the virtue of bourbon, the traditional and cultural acceptance, the time-honored craft, and then on the bottom here, you've got some of the things that talk about the darker side of bourbon, which is mysticism and rebellion and flaunting independence and thumbing your nose at virtue and subterfuge and kind of the underbelly side of bourbon. So when we looked at this, we saw, okay, there's heaven and there's hell. And that gave us the idea for up all night, got demons to fight. We went out, we looked at all those codes, as I mentioned before, and you can see a lot of these codes starting to talk about the same thing. And this is that idea of bonding these codes together. Like, how can we start taking a lot of these ideas and mashing them together to create a really emphatic notion? So again, going back to our iceberg, we said, you've got these intuitive and instinctive things, the fear of these snake eyes, the kind of violence implied by sprayed blood and spontaneity, the cultural things of these horns and mysticism and cultural lore and this kind of radiation of spikes of danger and hostile intent. And then the proof points, you've got a foil here of actually the code of law and the Gothic treatment of typography. So when all those things come together, and you can see how they're represented in different aspects of the design here, they create this notion of a brand or a product proposition that's inherently dangerous and maybe to be given a little bit of room when you come into contact with it, and definitely makes a statement about you when you're consuming it. Holy hell. The next is code slingshot, and this is about the idea of when you shoot a rocket ship around the moon to make it go faster. The same thing can happen with codes. You can take 2 different kinds of codes and use one to propel the meaning of another. So we did that with wound care. We thought about wound care and we're like, oh my God, Band-Aids are so ponderous. You have to unwrap them. You have to figure out how to get the sticky stuff off. You have to put it on yourself. If you've got a cut and there's no one around to treat you, you're really up a creek. So we looked at codes of personal technology. We thought, wow, this is a category and an opportunity for a product to be influenced by the things that are going on with handheld technology, iPhone packaging, iPhone design, device design, things like that, and really contrast that with the world of medical efficacy and technology and some of the things that are going on there and the benefits that you want to have. When you look at all those codes and you start to bring them together, at the heart of the instinctive proposition, we want to give you an assurance that everything's going to be okay. You're wounded, but don't worry, everything's under control, stay calm, we're going to take care of it. Then the cultural influence is this idea of confidence and efficacy, and then finally the proof point is, yes, we are indeed serious medical stuff. And that's where brand ease came from. And you can see how the codes work out for this. But Band Ease is a handheld medical device that actually applies Band-Aids from a sterile container right onto the site of the wound that you have. The last example I want to share is code fusion. And this is about, nuclear fusion. This is about things coming together that are totally different and smashing together to create something impactful. So it's death to germs. Everybody hates germs. We had a terrible rash of sickness, flu here in Chicago, and my wife was actually going around the house asking, how can I fight these germs? How can I, sanitize my house? She wanted to literally bomb the germs. So we thought, wow, that aggression that you feel with that kind of infestation is something maybe we can look at from a code perspective. So we went out and we looked at the world of military meaning, all these different signs and symbols of aggressive attack and meritocratic authority and things like that. And then on the other side we said, well, what is the end result we want? Relief and freedom and color and air and all those things. When you think about the top row being our military codes and the bottom being our freedom and exhilaration codes, again, we can put those things together according to our iceberg to create a really new to the world brand proposition. And for us, it was airstrike. So we had the idea of aerosol cans that can slide into a molded body that has the appearance and texture of a grenade, and also the functionality of a grenade, so that you can put it in the middle of a room, pull the pin, and walk out of the room, come back an hour later, and the room smells great, and it's clear of 99.9% of your germs. And, incorporating a lot of that color and feeling into it, but, still kind of stealthily bringing a bomb shape into the label and some of those other things. So, to finish up here, why is it important? For me, it's all about making design more effective. And not only effective in the end result, but more effective in the planning process of design. When you're thinking about this stuff proactively, you're going to end up with a more effective result. More effective in the process, you're going to get better ideas when you're thinking about meaning and how to connect the dots of meaning to get at those ideas. And finally, effective in results. You're going to get better results and more intuitively felt results if you follow this process. And like Eames says, the details are not the details. They make the design. So every detail of every design that we do, and hopefully that you do, has meaning and is geared towards driving the perception of meaning to your audience. So finally, I just want to finish with the point that meaning and understanding meaning creates relevance, which every brand wants to be these days is relevant. Relevance implies authenticity. The more relevant you're perceived by your audience, the more authentic and believable you're going to be. And if you're authentic, you're going to be trusted. And that is how we get on people's shopping lists by name, not just by product type. Because trust empowers desire. And desire is what design is meant to do, especially packaging design, when you're trying to get people to part with their hard-earned money. So I would encourage everyone to brand meaningfully and enjoy yourself while doing so. We certainly do here at Brandimage. And if you'd like to see more examples like I showed you here today, the whole exhibition that we did at Fuse, there's 8 pieces total with movies that accompany them and all sorts of great content on fusebrandimage.com. So go there for more detail, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me at rswan@brandimage.com with any questions, observations, or virtual tomatoes you want to throw at me. I am out of time, so I don't have a lot of time to answer questions now, but I'm happy to do it by email. Thank you very much, and I hope that you all have a very meaningful day.